Welcome back to Genshin Interact. Today we're going to be reviewing Kazuha and explaining how you should build him. He's a fairly easy character to build and makes for quite the powerful support to have in your roster. As always, make sure to like the video, and if you're coming back to watch our videos and aren't subscribed, go ahead and slap that subscribe button so you don't miss what's next. Also, if you are interested, we have a Discord server and would love to see you there. Now with all that out of the way, on to the video. With Nervalet and Kazuha being available, you might be seriously tempted to pull on the banner. And I don't blame you. But there's a small problem. Your Primogem count is lower than my IQ, and not even doing your commissions will get you enough for one pull. Lucky for you, I have a great way you can buy Primogems at a discount. Loot Bar is 100% safe and only requires your Genshin UID to purchase Genesis crystals. Normally, the price for me to buy 6,480 crystals is $100, but you can see here how Loot Bar has reduced the price to about $85, and if you're a new user, you get an additional 5% off. The way it works is that Loot Bar tops up your account through the official channel with Hoyoverse. After making a purchase, you can expect to receive it in 30 minutes or less. In my case, I received mine in just about 5 minutes. Another comforting thing about Loot Bar is that they are trustworthy and offer 24/7 live support. Other creators like Dukaja, Jello Impact, Superatom, Mujin, and Tevat Times have endorsed and used this product themselves, including both Vixen and myself. Just use the link in the description to get another discount on top of the already cheaper prices at purchase. Thank you Loot Bar for sponsoring today's video, and now let's dive in. So the first point I wanted to bring up about Kazuha before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of how you should actually build him is kind of just briefly talking about why Kazuha is so strong and why you probably hear everyone talk about just why he's such a crazy good character and one that almost is basically a must pull. And I think that has to do with Kazuha's role. He is an Anemo character and an Anemo support at that, so that makes him, be able to use sets like Viridescent Venerer, which is one of the best support sets in the game. He's a very flexible character, can be used as a flex slot in a lot of different teams, and even on top of all of this supporting capabilities, he actually deals his own pretty decent damage from off-field if you level into his talents. One of the relevant passives he does have is his second passive talent, Poetics of Fubutsu. In short, you're just increasing the damage of what element you swirled. You're giving damage bonus to that element. So if I swirl Hydro with Kazuha, then I'm giving characters in my party a Hydro damage bonus that scales on Kazuha's elemental mastery, which we'll talk about building later that you actually want to go into. He also doesn't need his weapon to be good. It's an EM main stat weapon, and you don't need it because there's so many 4-star options that are main stat of EM. And even if you're not doing that, there are other options there too. So he doesn't need it to be really, really good at what he does. And he's also one of only a few other best-in-slot supports that the game has to offer. And when I say that, I'm talking about characters like Nahida, Yelan, Furina, etc. Characters that just are really, really good and well-known for their supporting capabilities. And most of those characters are considered must-pulls, or at least something you should consider. Kazuha definitely is in that group. And most teams that Kazuha can be in can utilize him. As long as there is a swirlable element in the party, Kazuha kind of gets a placement in there to be decent at the very least. Obviously, this is going to increase his value as a character very, very much. But moving into artifacts, getting right into how you should build him, Vixen, what can you tell us about how you should build and use artifacts on Kazuha?
Looking at artifact sets first and foremost, we're going to look at probably the highest amount of usage rate that you're going to see on most Kazuhas, which is the 4-piece Viridescent Venerer set. Now, the reason why this is the best option that you could have in the entire game, really, and it's the real only set that I would say that you should really be running, unless you're trying to go for a DBS build or something like that, which I wouldn't really recommend unless you get to higher constellations and whatnot. But this set is very synergistic with Kazuha's playstyle, considering, like Riff was talking about earlier, you're going to be going for high elemental mastery to give buffs with the damage bonus from one of his passives. And then here, obviously, 4-piece Viridescent Venerer is going to decrease the resistance of whatever element that you swirl. And considering, obviously, he's an animal character, whatever element he swirls, Electro, Pyro, Cryo, Hydro, whatever element he's swirling, he's going to be decreasing enemies' resistance to that element for your characters to do more damage. Now, another piece that you could be using if you're in the middle of grinding for the Viridescent set, you could use a 4-piece Instructor set. This gives extra EM for the entire party, which is nice for maybe even some Dendro teams that you might want to slap together as well as, in case you're trying to have other characters do better on reactions like Vaporize. This could also be good for some soup teams as well, because everybody's creating constant reactions as well, so everybody can get a real good opportunity to do more damage because of that EM buff.
Now that we've talked about the artifact sets that you'll be wanting to use, let's talk about the main stats and substats you want to be looking for. Now, 99% of the time, when it comes to main stats, you're just going to want to use triple EM main stats on all of your Sands, Goblet, and your Circlet. You're just trying to get your EM as high as you possibly can to really maximize not just his swirl damage from off field possibly, but it's really coming down to his second passive that we talked about earlier, so that he's maximizing giving about all that extra damage bonus to whatever element he swirls. Now, as far as substats go, if you're doing the full EM on the main stats, obviously you can't get EM on those substats, but you can look for things like extra little things that'll help damage, like crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, but really you'll want a lot of energy recharge in your substats. I'd say from my personal experience, at least 160%. And if you have, maybe if you're using a sword like Zephos Moonlight, if you don't have his main sword, that does actually help you give energy to not just Kazuha, but also other party members, just because of the way the passive works on that, which we'll talk about later. So ER and EM are going to be your best bet for support Kazuha.
Looking beyond artifacts, a major part of every character's build is really looking at their weapon. So obviously Freedom Sworn is going to be his best in the slot weapon. But honestly, it's really not by that much actually. Compared to a lot of other weapons, especially 4-stars that you could use, Freedom Sworn's a great upgrade, especially because of the buff from a Millennial Movement that it gives, and it has a high amount of Elemental Mastery, more than the 4-stars. A lot of the 4-stars are cheaper to get. You probably have some other ones as well. As one of them is a big one that was used especially before Zephos' Moonlight, which is Iron Sting. That has a bunch of Elemental Mastery, as well as it is the whole point of being a free-to-play option, considering you can craft it. But Freedom Sworn, yes, it's a great weapon, but I personally wouldn't be trying to go after this weapon. If there's any time left on this banner, I wouldn't really be trying to grab that weapon to make your Kazuha the next tier. I would either wait for a DPS character that has their personal weapon with them, or I would, focus on just getting another character all in all. The next probably best weapon that he has is actually Zephos' Moonlight, and honestly, in my personal opinion, I like it more than Freedom Sworn actually. It has a great ER buff, and so that you don't have to worry about constantly getting your burst for every rotation. Now personally, I don't use my burst every rotation, and even still with 160 ER on my Kazuha and using a different weapon, I still get my buff pretty consistently. But if you're purposefully just going for a full EM all the way, no matter what, and you have a low ER, this is a great option to get some ER for your Kazuha as well as your other party members as well. Iron Sting is the next weapon. It is a great free-to-play option because you can craft it. And as well, it was probably his best weapon before all of the other, things really were happening, before Zephos' Moonlight. But I think Iron Sting's a great weapon. Like I said, free-to-play option, and it's honestly just an easy slap-on weapon, and it gives a good amount of Elemental Mastery and an extra little bit of personal damage for Kazuha. Tokubo Shigure is a different weapon that was during an event a while ago, and it's a good alternative in general if you have the weapon, and because it could free up the ability for putting these other weapons on some other characters. For instance, if you have Iron Sting on a Kuki, and Kuki can't really use any other weapon, then putting Tokubo Shigure on Kazuha would probably be the better alternative, just so Kuki can have more damage based on for herself. That kind of is the major idea between the EM options. There are some other options that you could use, like Sacrificial Sword and Favonia's Sword, but you're really focusing on a lot of energy recharge or getting your skill back to basically. The Sacrificial allows you to basically have the C1 for free, and Favonia's allows you to just create more particles for your entire team, as well as helps your Kazuha get his burst back a little bit quicker.
Now looking into Kazuha's Constellations, I'm going to be very brief and to the point. His first one's pretty good and is a nice extra touch of either damage or even just really particles for not just him but also the team. It just gives him another use of his skill after you've used the burst. So most people, when they have this, they'll go into the rotation. When they swap into Kazuha, they use skill and then they do burst and then they do the skill again. So it's nice for the extra particles and allows you to not have to run something like Sacrificial if you really are just hungry for energy. It's a really nice quality of life. It's also got a lot of fun factor behind it, and I don't think you can go wrong with it. But it's also a good setup to get to his second constellation, which is his best constellation. This constellation is basically just giving you 200 Elemental Mastery while you're in the field of Kazuha's burst, and this works with any character that's standing in it. So it's going to be very good for a lot of teams that can really utilize extra damage that is, specifically come from extra Elemental Mastery. A lot of Dendro teams can use this, especially if you're doing an aggravate-driven Sino or catching, and there's even cases out there for Raiden. So it is going to be really helpful for those electro units in that scenario because you're getting all the EM for aggravate hits, and Kazuha is giving you the damage bonus for electro. So it's very synergistic in that sense too, but also vaporize teams. You know, there's a lot of different things. I mean, having the EM buff is just very, very nice, right? After that, though, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, I would say are just not necessary. The 3rd and 5th are going to be just extra damage, really. 4th is, in my opinion, not that great. But if you're going after the 6th, you'll obviously have those. And the 6th is just really turning him into an Animo DPS. It's going to give him an Animo infusion. In that sense, you'd probably be running Mist Splitter as your weapon. Your substats and main stats are going to be different. You're probably going to have a good crit ratio and all those things like that. If you don't have this, though, if you're anything but C6 Kazuha, we definitely recommend that you build support Kazuha.
Looking at teams next, we're going to be talking about looking at really any team that really utilizes Hydro, Cryo, or Pyro, or even Electro damage in general as the main damage dealer, because those elements are going to be the ones that Kazuha can swirl and allows him to give those buffs that we were just talking about, obviously from specifically that passive talent, as well as the 4-piece Viridescent. Now, soup teams, like I was talking about earlier, are going to be very powerful in this sense because it's going to be buffing, and Kazuha can actually buff multiple different elements at once. And so if he swirls at any point in time with his skill or his burst, he can have up to 2, and then if you have a C1, you could technically have 3 of them going on at one time, as long as it's within all the 8 seconds that he has for that buff to keep going. Now, in general, this is just going to be a very interesting team because you could just throw any DPS that can be swirled with him, and he's absolutely goated with them. Now, looking into the future, especially if you have Kazuha right now, one of the best teams that's going to be good for you is going to be putting him with Arlecchino and then popping him with a Bennett as well to just buffer even more, and then just throwing on Vaporize. Not only are you able to swirl the Pyro, but if you get the burst to have some constant Hydro going on to allow Arlecchino to vaporize more, it's going to be great. And if you have a C2 Kazuha as well, you're increasing Arlecchino's ability to vaporize higher because her elemental mastery will be higher as well, and that can work with other teams that are doing reactions as well. There are a lot of different teams that you could use them with, Ayaka and Shenhe with, just a freeze team with Kazuha. You could have Raiden with a Kazuha and a Bennett and a Kujosara to try to go for just straight damage on Electro. Ayato can work extremely well with him as well as Child. Nivelette, obviously, with Furina, just swirling as well. A lot of these teams are going to be extremely, extremely good just to really go the extra mile with his buff that he gives from both his passive talent as well as from Viridescent. Now, some other teams that have some AoE limitations could be actually extremely useful for this, and the reason why is because you can use your hold skill to do a little bit of a grouping ability, and that actually will allow your characters like Aggravate, Catching, or Sino, especially when they get in their burst and whatnot, to just allow them to focus more on just doing constant amounts of damage that are knocking things back a little bit, as well as, even some overload teams or whatever. Ayato, who kind of stays in place and does the best with keeping enemies close to him, with Kazuha as a grouping ability and pulling things close to him. Ayato can just stay in place and you don't have to waste time on his skill to move him. Raiden's the same way, with you only have a certain amount of time after your burst for those enhanced normal attacks with the Electro, so dashing and trying to catch up to an enemy is a little bit annoying and takes away from DPS time.
Other scenarios where you might find yourself wanting to use Kazuha in some of these teams that Vixen's already mentioned is just any team in general where you need extra application of an element. If Kazuha grabs that element that you want more application of with his burst, it's going to really, really help with the application. Like you actually mentioned that already, Vixen, with Vaporize for Arlecchino. If Kazuha, let's say you're using Xingqiu or Yelan, is grabbing Hydra with the burst, it's going to be really, really helpful for Arlecchino to get a lot more vaporizing opportunities, right? And so there's a lot of scenarios in the game where Kazuha can do that, and it becomes very helpful and pretty fun to actually double swirl to get both bonuses for. So he's very great in that scenario. There's also quicken teams you can use in involving Nahida on a crypt build maybe. Maybe your Nahida isn't built on full EM. And so because Kazuha is built full EM if you're running him as a support, this allows Nahida to use Kazuha's high elemental mastery for her passive talent so that you can still be giving a lot of elemental mastery to your entire party as long as they're standing in Nahida's burst, right? And really any quicken team for that matter that can use Aggravate as the main focus really likes Kazuha because Kazuha is giving the Electro damage bonus, is grouping, and is helping out Nahida with the elemental mastery. There's also some other niche things you could do, like Burgeon has been fun. Both Vixen and I really like that one. But the thing is with this one, you have to have C6 Bennett so that you're giving Kazuha a Pyro infusion. That way he becomes an on-field Burgeon driver. And so it can be really fun, but you also need a good Dendro and Hydro applicator from off-field for this team to work. So it's something that you can do. The reason it works is because Kazuha is already built on super high elemental mastery. So when he does hit a Burgeon, it's going to be really, really high. Right? And also naturally, just passively, he's going to be swirling elements. So if you're using a character like your Hydro application in there is Yelan, well, you're increasing Yelan's damage too. Not to mention all the Burgeon is applying a lot of Pyro, so maybe Yelan's getting in some Vaporize. So there's just a lot of things kind of happening. It's kind of another version of a soup team, really. And as we've talked about, like soup teams are just going to be powerful with Kazuha because he's doing so much for them.
That's everything we have over Kazuha. We hope you guys enjoyed the video so far. If you did, please go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. If you want to connect with us a little bit more or just chill out with some other Genshin fans, go ahead and join the Discord. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.